So let us get started. Welcome everyone to this fourth webinar already that we are organizing in the EU HTA regulation series. This time today, we will be talking about the Joint Scientific Consultation, or the JSC, and we will be discussing key timings, steps, and the strategy. Let's start to introduce ourselves briefly for the ones who haven't met us. Sigrid.
Yes, I'm an oncologist by training, and I've been for many years in the EU regulatory system as a clinical assessor, and also several years in the HTA world at the Swedish HTA agency, where I also worked on this regulation before it was adopted and the implementation work. And what about you, Chantal?
Yes, so I have a slightly different background. I'm a medical doctor by training with a PhD in health economics and epidemiology. And actually, I've been mostly of my career in academia and consulting, with a couple of years as pharma, doing a lot of leadership in real world studies, including indirect treatment comparisons, external comparator study, quite technical background, but then also a lot around a general HTA needs and evidence generation, discussing with payers and HTA bodies what to do, how to design studies, and mostly in oncology and rare diseases. So I think it's quite on topic, as you know, where we are with the HTA regulation.
Yep.
So let's move to the agenda for today. So it's all about the joint scientific consultation, and we have kind of grouped it into the why, the what, the how, and the what if. So the why is really the purpose and the benefits of an early engagement with EU HTA. And then we will be describing, or the secrets mainly, the all ins and outs about the JSC process, requirements, timelines, and the next steps and the key steps to take. We will then pause for Q&A in the middle. So, and you're all welcome already to, as we go, to put some questions in the chat, not the Q&A, in the chat. So we will be following up on that. So we can address your questions already on the first part. And then we will go more on the how do you prepare? And how do you prepare for a good strategy? How do you think about that? And also all the other preparations that you need to do for your JSC, including thinking around should you go parallel or do a standalone advice. Last but not least, we'll briefly discuss what if you don't get a JSC, because we know or that you may not be granted, or it may be too late for you. So then there are options. And we will end with another Q&A to address all your questions. So we're looking forward to an interactive session. So yeah, let's get started.
Yes.
Okay, to have everyone on the same page, let's first quickly go back to what is the HTA regulation. I think most of you know, but very brief. Basically, we already had an EMA pathway to regulatory approval, and now what is new is that we also have a new HTA regulation which runs completely in parallel with the EMA procedure and introduces a coordinated way and a mandatory process for joint clinical assessment, so relative effectiveness. And this will, like we know, in parallel with the EMA, and will then be the base for a path to national access. And we need to tick both boxes, not just the EMA, in order to have a successful starting point for access procedures across Europe.
Yes, and furthermore, the JCA procedure is now mandatory, starting with the oncology and ATMP drugs. So regardless what you think, it is happening, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the previous one, we have been doing webinars where we were talking in the future, and now it's no longer future, and we are already getting some first experiences in. In the next slide, you will briefly see, you know, what that parallel thing means, with some details around the procedure. Let's not go into all details, but if we focus on the left-hand side, you see that in parallel or around the same phase that you would consider regulatory scientific advice, now we see orange bullet for joint scientific consultation. And that's what we'll be talking today. And that ultimately all that advice feeds into the later things we need to do for a strong package from both an EMA perspective, a regulatory perspective, as well as for the JCA.
Yes, so here's one last catch-up slide just to make sure that everyone is on board with the concept of the PICO. PICO is a framework that is used to describe the assessment scope for a relative effectiveness assessment, such as the Joint Clinical Assessment Procedure. So this is used to communicate from the HTA assessors which analysis you are supposed to deliver in your JCA. So P stands for population, and that starts with the sort indication, of course, but could also be subpopulations that have a different treatment option, for example. The intervention is your drug or combination of drugs. Comparator is what is often referred to the relevant or appropriate comparator, which is the current therapy in each country that is used for your condition that you're treating. So it's likely that there could be differences across EU, and that will mean that you will have several different PICOs, different analysis scopes. Outcomes, that's just the different endpoints and parameters that you need to collect, and the different analysis that you need to present to the HTA assessors in the JCA. At the bottom here, it's very important to remember that you will be given an analysis scope. You don't choose yourself what to send in, and that is why going for a JSC is so valuable, because this is a chance to get some information on what you can expect, also in terms of the picoscopes. So that was the recap. So now we can start with the new things for this webinar. And let's start with the why. Why would you go for a joint scientific consultation? Well, basically, there are two main reasons for companies to do this, and it's to have input on the acceptability of your evidence strategy and the methodology you want to use. And also to find out about the likely PICOs in the future JCA, as I just mentioned. And the first one here is the same as for regulatory scientific advice, basically, but this one is then unique to HTA, depending on the fact that you will not decide yourself what to send in. And when we look at the HTA regulation, the HTAR, you can see that these reasons or objectives align well with the HTA regulation described purpose, which is to facilitate the evidence generation for a future joint clinical assessment. And the scope is that it should be about all relevant clinical studies design aspects, including comparators, intervention, outcomes, and population. So that's the PICO again. And once you have a JSC, the outcome that you receive and in the discussions, all the feedback you gain will, of course, then be used to inform your evidence generation and evidence synthesis strategy, and to modify it where possible and prepare mitigation strategies as needed. So this is very important.
Yeah, and I think secrets to the experiences we have so far, that sometimes there are it's not even about what PICOs can I expect, but then you have identified a lot of different PICOs, and you hope to get out of this advice to get a better sense on some potential consolidation or where you need to focus your evidence generation. Because you can imagine it with the PICO as you just defined them, it can easily lead to a lot of different aspects that you may need to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree. And that could hopefully be one of the results, that you get more consolidation than divergence, so to speak, in comparators. Okay, so then what is JSC? Well, we already know it's an advice procedure similar to the regulatory scientific advice. So now let's look at the details here. And here you see a timeline for the procedure with the company actions below the timeline and the HTA assessors and HTA organizations activities above in light blue. And it all starts at the left here when you as a company send in your JSC request through the platform that is used for this purpose. And this will be done during the official request period. So it's not open all year long. You have to fit the request period. And then the assessors will look at your application or request and see if you fulfill the eligibility criteria and the selection criteria if needed. And I will come back to that soon, what that is. And then within 15 working days of the end of the request period, the company will receive information on whether they were accepted or rejected for the JSC and also the timeline for the procedure. And then you see several small arrows before the next step, and that is to signify that for each request period, you can choose between different slots. So, for example, right now is a current request period that ends in the 30th of June, and there are 3 different time slots to choose between, starting and ending in 3 different months. But then when your slot starts, you begin with sending in your briefing package at day -30. And then after approximately 2 weeks, you will get a request for clarification from the HTA assessors, and they will have looked quite closely at this. And you can be really expect to have to do amendments to your package. And then you will submit your amended, and this will be the final briefing package that will be used for the procedure 2 weeks later. And then the evaluation starts, and at day 40, you will receive a list of questions and that you need to respond to within 10 days. So on day 50, you submit your responses to the list of issues, and also the PowerPoint presentation for the discussion meeting and the list of participants. And then day 60 into the procedure, that is when the meeting happens with the HTA people. And it will be maximum 3 hours long, and it will include both the HTA assessors, which come from 2 different member states, and other experts or patient representatives as needed. Also, other members of the JSC subgroup can be part of that meeting. And then 5 days after the meeting, the company is supposed to send their minutes. And on day 70, the outcome document will be approved by the HTA coordination group and then sent to the company. And it says HTD here, that's Health Technology Developer. That's the company abbreviation in this context. So that is what it all looks like. And then, of course, you can also ask for a parallel joint scientific consultation together with the regulators. And here the EMA layer is added on top. And as you can see, all the activities and deadlines are fully aligned with the HTA counterparts. And also the JSC request is the one that you send through the IT platform that is used for both. So that's all set, and you will get the final advice letter at the same time then. Okay. And then if we start from the beginning then with the JSC requests, as I mentioned, this is done through this IT platform. And here, this is used for all type of communication between the company and the HTA organization, let's say. So you can find information here on the request periods and the deadlines and the number of available slots, etc. And this is also where you submit your JSC request and the briefing package, and later on also the dossier for the JCA. So to be able to receive a JSC, you have to fulfill 2 eligibility criteria, and they both need to be fulfilled. The first one is that your health technology, your drug, is likely to be the subject of a future joint clinical assessment. And the second is that the clinical studies are still in the planning stage. So those are the eligibility criteria, but there are also selection criteria that are really important to work on at the time of the request. So because these selection criteria, this is the actual copy of the request form. This is what it looks like. And these selection criteria will be used if there are more requests than the available number of procedures in that request period. And you need to tick at least one of these selection criteria to be eligible. But you can tick all or several, but at least one. And you should tick all that applies to your drug. And you see here then that for each one that you tick a yes, you also have to substantiate how you think that you fulfill this criterion. And that goes for all these then.
Great.
Yeah.
Can you share some insights on that you have on how detailed this substantiation should be?
Yes, I think this is probably the most important part in getting the JSC. So you shouldn't do it too briefly. I mean, you should, if you have compelling arguments why you fulfill a certain criteria, you don't need to, very much abbreviate it. Be sure you get the message across is what I would say. So here you can actually pull in data if you have, earlier phase data that shows a clear advantage in some aspects. This is where you should actually make use of them to increase your chances of getting a JSC. And here is some of these selection criteria are not very, intuitive when you just look at them. But fortunately, there has been a guidance that came out from the HTA coordination group late last year that brings more clarity. And unmet medical needs, that is pretty similar to the thinking around conditional marketing authorization. So nothing really unexpected there. But this guidance actually mentions the upcoming changes to the pharma regulation, the new regulation that is being worked on, and specifically mentions that the interpretation of this criterion could change depending on how the regulation will change. First in class is easy, and it's really good to know that this applies to your condition that you're treating. So even if the medicine, there are other medicines with the same mechanism of action authorized. If they're not authorized for your specific indication, you will still fulfill this criterion. Then we have potential impact on patients, public health, or healthcare systems. And this is where you can present data that shows that you have a likely improvement on important patient endpoints. But it could also be changes to the healthcare system if you simplify a process, for example. Then we have significant cross-border dimension. And this, I feel, is still not quite clear, what is expected here. There is not much more information than what is given here on the slide. The product should be within the remit of a EU decision-making body. and apply to a majority of European member states. And this is not quite clear to me. Perhaps someone else knows, but since all drugs are within the remit of EU decision-making bodies, the EMA and the European Commission for the author, I suspect there could be something additional that is needed here. Perhaps just speculating wildly, it could be if you have a pandemic vaccine in a pandemic situation, maybe that could be something that is discussed in other EU fora that is could, but this is just wild speculation, so I really don't know that. Then we have the major union-wide added value, and here it's kind of, I see it as a a reward for focusing on the EU, because here if you have a trial that reflects EU patient population and also demonstrating benefit against an EU recommended treatment, then you could tick this box. So if you have an RCT performed with in the EU and using an EU relevant comparator, that could be a way to get that one. And finally, union clinical research priorities is exemplified by, for example, if you are targeting a disease that is also in the focus of European Commission research programs, for example. So
And
then
you don't need to, I mean, officially it's enough to tick one of these boxes, right? But since
yeah,
we expect that there is quite some selection necessary, if you balanced, the amounts of slots and availabilities against what is coming and what most likely is going to be really relevant, I think also the traction we see happening. What do you think would be the most tricky situation where you feel that it may be very hard these days to get a
yeah, well,
chase?
this is yeah, thank you. I would have to just guess, speculate,
That's okay.
but you mean, if when would you be worried not to meet any of the criteria, basically? And then I guess if you're in the second or third line, or second or third um,
In class,
in
right?
class,
Yeah.
yes, and then you might not fulfill the first three criteria, possibly. So that could be a problem. But then, of course, you could be lucky and your disease is in the European Commission research programs. So then you could tick the F, or even maybe you had a trial that had at least a substantial part of the study population in the EU and you had a EU relevance. So then you could use the E criterion. So I'm not sure, and it's really not. I'm not sure how the C criterion will be looked at. But in general, HTA assessments, they are looking at what is authorized and used at the time of the marketing authorization. So if you have a competitor that is already marketed and used in the Europe, then I expect that they would want to compare with that, and then the potential impact, the likely improvement could be a challenge, I suspect.
Great.
Thanks. Good question. Okay, so then what should we talk about in the JSC? Well, there are a few topics that I see as important and relevant to discuss with the HTA assessors. And of course, pivotal study is on the top here, and that's the same as for the regulatory advice. To get input on your design and hopefully endorsement of the design as well. And then, as we have talked about already, to seek in intel on the likely PICOs for your future JSA. That is actually one of the important things about it going for JSC. And if you would take this even further, and use the JSC to its fullest, you could also ask about the design and the evidence generation strategy, the methodology, and sources for your indirect treatment comparisons for those PICOs that are not addressed by the pivotal study.
And
But
I
this, of
think this is
course,
quite important, right, Secret? Because
yeah,
I mean, I feel that quite some people don't feel they're there yet when they
exactly.
but I think this is an excellent opportunity to kind of get some endorsement and understanding of what is it they need to see, because now you have still time to um, work on it
Yeah.
outside of your pivotal study, which is much better than, have some unpleasant surprises at the very end. And I think if you have a good agreement with them during the meeting and explain, why you take a certain approach, and you get kind of an approval, or at least nodding that it's a good approach, then I think you will be better placed also when it comes to the final assessment.
Yes, but of course it means you have to prepare. You have to be
Yes.
ready when you do the request for what kind of questions you want to ask, and then just a few months or 1 month later you have to actually submit this. So there is a lot of work, and I know you will talk about it soon. On you can't just ask them what PICOs will you ask for in the JCA. You have to present to them, this is what we think, and then you get their input. So that is a lot of work. And also, if you then take it further and look at the methodologies for the indirect comparisons, then of course you need to do that as well to be able to ask the question. We are thinking of doing it this way. What do you think? So it means a lot of preparation, and that is not always possible, especially not now. I mean, ideally, and in the future, when people are used to this, companies will plan much further, much earlier for this HTA evidence generation, and will have done this during the clinical development. But now companies are coming in with no preparation. And that is a challenge. And that's why I have the second bullet point, or the last bullet point from the bottom here, that depending on the situation, you might go for a narrower scope because you simply don't have the time to do the whole thing. So anyway, these are the main themes you can talk about. And then based on your program, you will, of course, formulate your specific questions based on that. Okay, so this is another section of the request form, and this is where you must indicate what areas of advice you want to talk about. And here I have ticked all the ones that are usually expected to be included for a JSC. You see the top ones are actually regulatory topics. Those are for the parallel procedures, quality and non-clinical. And here you see also the PICOs again. So you put your questions into this format. And there are also two optional questions at the bottom here. The PLEG means post-launch evidence generation. And that is, for example, if you're perhaps going for a parallel procedure even, and discussing a conditional marketing authorization and the confirmatory trial, then you have the chance to discuss the confirmatory evidence also here with the HTA assessors. And then the last one, health economic assessment, that is an optional one, and it's not included in the HTA regulation, and it's not in scope of the JCA procedure. But this is an opportunity to discuss with the national HTA bodies also health economic assessments. So this will not be a joint response to this question, but individual member states can give input on those questions here. Yeah.
Yeah, and it could be helpful, right, Sigrid, because
Yeah.
this request form can trigger that, the and the HTA bodies are also looking into this. But also for this, very briefly, you need to kind of have usually you use this to kind of pressure test your model structure, the outcomes that you want to run in your economic analysis, inputs, assumptions. So I think typically
Sorry.
very it's rather early to already be there. I hope in the future we'll get there, and then it's a great opportunity. But it's you can only go in if you are quite advanced in your thinking on
Mm,
both the PICOs, but also your average generation, and then also your modeling structure, etc. So it's well, it's
and
very valuable, but also comes with readiness for this kind of
yeah.
advice.
It could be, I mean, even if you haven't thought so much about the exact modeling, you might just want to discuss which parameters should we include in our study. So some of those questions could be possible, while the more advanced modeling questions might not be ready. So, right.
And secret I believe this section at the request form stage can be rather brief, right? It's the briefing package that requires the deep thinking questions,
Yeah.
positions, etc. But this one is you don't need to have all questions
No.
ready yet. Is that correct?
Exactly, and it's underlined in red here by me. So briefly outline the scope, but it's still of each question. So each question must still be. We intend to ask about the PICO or for the population for this. You know, you still have to, even though, but you don't need to give the details. You know exactly what comparators or whatever you are discussing, but the topic, so to speak, of the question should be in there. Uh, okay.
I think we are at the Q&A secret, and I
Yes.
have a couple of questions that
Okay. I can't.
one is, I think, a very brief one. Are the HTA, HTD meetings in person or virtual? I think you will be able to.
Sorry, what did you say again?
The
I was.
meetings, are they virtual or are they in person?
Aha. The meetings. Yes. They are. They should be. Uh, both. Or I think both are possible, but they should be in person as well. They should.
The
There
default
should
is
be a
person.
possibility to have it in person. That is, sorry. Yeah.
Great, good to hear. And there is this question, and I started to think about it already a bit, but is it possible to request a joint scientific consultation before even initiating your phase two, and then request a follow-up consultation before phase three? And also how, and that's also the question, how do they define the planning phase for a clinical program? So this is a lot of questions in one, actually. Thanks for
Yeah.
asking. First is, can you have two? That's maybe the first question. Is it
Yeah.
theoretically possible, if you have good reasons, to request another one in a later stage?
Um, I I must say I don't know. I don't think it's foreseen in the regulation. There's no wording about it in the regulation as far as I know.
I'm asking you
Uh,
because I know you have read the regulation to the letter.
yeah.
But
Uh,
yeah, so there's also no reason that it's forbidden. You
no, I
can
can't
also
see that
turn it
it's
around, right?
forbidden. But then to think practically about it, I think now that there could be a, they will not prioritize a second one if there are others who didn't even have their first one. That could be a situation that, well, you already got your advice from us, and we will prioritize someone else who didn't.
And
This
then
is just me thinking. I don't have this from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But there was also a question about the planning stage, right?
yeah,
And the planning, how do they define the planning phase for a clinical program? And this actually is that's the one of the two criteria that must be fulfilled. And this is a bit problematic in my view, because now everyone is focusing on the pivotal trial, and it is also in the written guidance now that it is refers to the pivotal trial. And the reason why I think this is problematic is, of course, because a company could really need a lot of input. It would be very valuable for them to have input on the indirect treatment comparisons, even though their pivotal trial is already started or something like that. So that is unfortunate in my view, but I know this is being discussed.
It
So
may
hopefully
evolve,
it could
right?
change. But
I
today, that is
yeah.
the definition. Today, we must live with this, that it's a pivotal trial. If that one is not open to any changes, then you will not receive the JSC.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, this may indeed evolve. My perspective, how they started it is that they were really keen on having the same rules compared to what's happening in the EMA, being
Yeah,
kind of making sure that early enough,
yeah,
in planning stage, this is being considered to have full kind of impact on the pivotal design, as being considered a better source of evidence than later
yeah,
potential indirect treatment comparisons. However, in practice, and I think this connects to some of the other questions, if you consider indeed that an RCT may take 2 to 3 years to complete, and the PICO landscape may change, and so there is a lot of dynamics going on even in the last years, and
yeah,
therefore it's also tricky to go too early, and that's
yeah,
to the question of Vincent, who was asking, what if you want to go before phase 2? Well, you can wonder how relevant that is, because the earlier you go, the more likely things are going to change. So my take on that is a little bit, if you consider that your phase 2 may become your pivotal in the end, because you feel you are eligible for accelerated approval
yeah,
pathways, for that's your track that you are on, then it may be relevant, because then you want to, or very ultra rare maybe, you want to make sure that you do it right at the pivotal phase stage, and this may be earlier than a phase 3. But
mm,
it's really a balance between, and I will get back to that in later, between what is strategically wise, and if you expect a lot of dynamics, and if you have an opportunity to wait a bit, you may want to wait or supplement later with other types of advice.
yeah. And we will come to that as well.
Yeah, and then there's one other question. Can questions in the request be different from what will be included in the briefing document? Well, I think theoretically no, but but happy to hear your opinion on that, Secret.
Yeah,
But I think that if you fill in the request, it can be rather brief. So I think
exactly.
you can be strategically smart with your request
Yeah.
to keep it this high level that you can go in several directions as you narrow down. What
Mm.
do you think, Sigrid? That's why
Yeah,
how
I
I would.
think so too. And I'm not sure how strict they will actually be, but that is, of course, not for us to say. It would be safest to go for to make sure you have ticked all the boxes you want to tick and describe the questions that you want to do. Um, and then, as you said, keep them broad enough to be able to little bit change them as you go along the actual concrete question in the briefing package. Yeah, so I think we are on the same page there.
And then one before we move on, because I can imagine that we're getting a lot of questions around this, is that what if you have this US, your trial is already in phase 3 in the US, and you may be able to not, make many changes from an EMA regulatory perspective. Are you automatically no longer eligible because it's not longer in the planning phase? And I think here, this is coming back to, it's under discussion. It may be evolving. Today, it seems not. However, I think maybe if you were able to substantiate why you really need this advice, and why you had no opportunity, and you are still willing to maybe amend some things, if you open to protocol amendments, I think there's also this. This may not be as black and white, and experience will tell us, because that's the thing. This is just starting. We don't know yet all the
Yeah,
things, and it's also trial and error, in that sense. But I would say, if there's good reasons from a scientific point of view, and that could be also relevant from an HTA body point of view, to have this advice in, or to be able to give the advice, I think we can
yeah.
ground a substantiation.
We will see, but I think at now, with the written guidance saying it refers to the pivotal trial. Until that is changed, we cannot really say that it can be done. So if your pivotal trial is not up for amendment, because that could be a way, if you say we are willing to change our ongoing trial, or if it hasn't started, then
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
that then you're okay if you, because that you can state in the request form that it's up for amendment, but not if you're not going to change it with the
Yeah, and then the
current
last, very
interpretation.
quickly,
Okay,
what
I'll go
will
for it.
affect eligibility? Will it affect the eligibility for your JSC if your request questions are too broad? But I think it's two different things, right? You have the selection criteria, and then you have the question section, and the questions itself are not formally part of the selection process. Is that true?
No,
So
no,
I
yeah,
think it's okay.
yeah,
Okay, let's move on because I also have some more things to share,
yes.
and I want to make sure we can address more questions. So let's
Okay.
yeah, move to how to prepare. I don't have too many slides, and I think a very important thing here is, and we discussed about this, knowing what to ask. You need to do your homework, and into our experiences. A lot of people in the audience will have regulatory background, be very familiar with scientific advice on a regulatory side. Um, you will never go in a regulatory EMA scientific advice blind, right? You will have done your designing, your strategic homework. You know what your situation is and what you want to get out of it and what your specific questions are. Well, it's not that different from from preparations from a picoscope perspective. I think it's good to really understand what are your potential picoscope scenarios and start I would say start with that as you start designing your pivotal phase 3. You know, it's like going hand in hand. So start earlier, even before you want to go, ideally, before you want to go for your advice. It can inform your timelines even. How do you do that? I think two things are really important. It's understanding the therapeutic landscape, because remember, the PICOs are connected to the current standard of care across Europe today, but also expected from pipelines and future to kind of anticipate that. So how that we go around this is that we have a couple of sources that we typically look into and then try to come with the comprehensive understanding. It starts with guidance documents. So many of us are in the oncology space, for example. I would always start with ESMO guidelines, then try to understand how this is different, maybe in different countries across Europe. And really understanding what are for your potential positioning relevant comparators, potential subpopulations. So go into that. And then next step is to kind of dive deeper and look competitor intelligence of those existing standard of care what that potentially will be compared with. What do you know about that? Where is it placed? What were considerations? Also there, in what populations and subpopulations do they look like? And then also very much look into the pipeline of the new products and their likely registration. Lastly, to go back on the current standard of care, guidance documents typically don't tell you what the actual use is of the product in the real world, because it could be that theoretically it's recommended and in practice it's not being used for many different reasons. So therefore, we always try to understand from real world evidence databases what is the actual use. That can be high level, of course, at this stage, right? But that's how we go around it. And then very much we inform ourselves, looking, if possible, at national HTA decisions. These HTA dossiers are, especially the ones in France and in Germany, are, and I think also Sweden and the Netherlands, but there are some countries are good at publishing very well all kinds of documentation. Italy is also pretty okay on that, and will really help you to understand what kind of comparators were considered before, and what kind of populations, and whether there are any reimbursement restrictions in subpopulations that you may want to consider. You can do this and then you can supplement this. I mean, it's always good, I think, to supplement it with expert opinion, but there's always a right momentum for, and also connected to your uncertainty, to what do I want to complement with expert advice, right? To further understand. This is the therapeutic landscape, but then there is also the outcomes part, because sometimes it's not so clear what are the relevant outcomes. Sometimes it's very clear. For example, PFS-OS, in oncology, quality of life is typically, but what type of measure? So it's good to look into the formal HTA CG guidance, but then also there looking at the competitors, what they took as outcome strategy, also look at the regulatory side and look at HTA decisions and confirm with experts. So this is homework that you can do very detailed, you can do it very high level, but this first homework or go from high level to detailed later is really important to understand what are my tricky points, where do I have uncertainties, what will be easier to meet in terms of evidence generation, and what do I really need to think about and want to ask advice on. So very important first step. Next slides.
Yes, and as I said before, I just want, if you're in a time crunch, if you're just, we have to submit the request now, maybe you don't have time to do all this deep digging. This is ideal situation where you have a lot of time, and ideally you would do it for several years before the JCA and the JSC, but then you could, some of this might not be time for the expert opinion, for example, or going too deep in the national decisions. But you can still look at guidance documents quite quickly, and you can still have a look at the competitive landscape, your competitors, and so on.
Yeah, we do that. We are currently helping some of our clients with a last minute meeting the 30th of June deadline, high level, crunch it through, and hope that we at least get the request in a good shape to then do the deep dive during the briefing package. So all possible. Let's go to the next slide, because I'm very mindful of the time that we have left.
Can I just mention one learning from these procedures is that what is often a problem is that the indications are not fully set yet, and that will of course very much impact on this PICO scoping.
Absolutely.
So that is perhaps one of the biggest challenges for us when we help companies with this, that we don't even know which PICOs to look for because the indication is not fully set. So let's move on.
Yeah, let's be really brief on this because I really want to dive more into preparation. But there is this, you can go parallel versus sequential. I think I'm going to skip this slide over because we have no time. But I think what is important is that there are several pros and cons in both aspects, and I think the next slide is more intuitive on how do you kind of think around it.
Yeah.
So parallel versus sequential. Well, it depends what you need to do, because first of all, what are the timelines to the finalization of your pivotal protocols? If you are on a tight deadline and you want to close your pivotal trial and you would like to have in both EMA as well as the JSC advice, there's maybe no time to go sequential and use the first EMA and then move forward. On the other hand, these days this year we have only 2 slots for submission. So if you have just missed a slot and you want to move fast forward for the EMA scientific advice, there are many more slots for EMA. So you may not want to wait for the next JAC slot to get your EMA advice in. Of course, did you do your preparation? Is it possible to do it now and be ready for a good advice? Very importantly, that we are facing is how certain is your regulatory strategy. And of course, often the full indication is not clear. This is already a challenge and you have to work with scenarios. But also, I mean, if you don't know yet whether you want to go for a conditional marketing authorization or a full one based on your pivotal phase 2 or your 3 or even bigger regulatory questions, then it may be too broad, in a too broad stage to fully kind of get all the the information from a joint scientific consultation. So,
It
and
might be
that of course
impossible.
relates to the timelines. Do you have time to
Yeah.
then first set your regulatory strategy and then move on? There is of course a fallback. Maybe you want to use your HTA for to set your regulatory strategy, but I think that could be tricky because the HTA bodies, want it all. So, so I think this is a strategic discussion that you would need to have, and we're happy to support. But just think about how are the two strategies coming together? How open are you to many changes, or how rigid, or how much are you connected to what has already been decided for the FDA? These are all aspects that I think would help in setting your strategy. And then, of course, it connects to what other forms of advice are you considering? We'll get back to that later, but it's kind of could be a blended approach. So preparing, this is actually one of the last really informative slides. So we're getting there, preparing for maximized JSC outputs. Just the do's. We already discussed the pre-work, right? Consider your regulatory strategy, do your homework, develop your picoscope scenarios, and what that means for your evidence strategy, and what options would you have, what in your pivotal, what maybe indirect, and do I want to go with parallel or not? And then as you move into requesting your advice, I think a few things are important. Cross-functional alignment on the goal of the advice. I think there is it's very important, of course, to have everyone aligned and not the HTA working on different islands than the regulatory strategy. I must say, I think this happened a lot in the past, and I hope that this whole HTA regulation will kind of make sure that there is this cross-functional alignment. But keep in mind, if your organization is working quite siloed, this is a risk, and you need to make sure that everyone is aligned also. And that's the second point, to understand your non-negotiable elements. You don't want to, you want to have your framework. This is what we're going to do. To name an example, if you know that you are going with a single arm trial because all regulators agreed that an RCT is not feasible in this small population, you may want to write in your submission, okay, we are going for this. This is the reason. So now we would like your advice on how to build the package from this starting point, and not asking, do you think this is a good idea? No, HTA will never think it's a good idea to do a single arm trial. So it's the wrong question. So this is how align on your non-negotiables and start from there is I think a wise thing to do. Of course, develop your strategy, your template, and then also consider upfront, okay, what if we don't get it granted? I don't think any of the prep work is lost time, because you have to do it anyways, right? But then you can already think, okay, what does our strategy look like? Moving towards your briefing package, really think about how you ask your questions. It's, I would say, similar with regulatory advice. You want to have specific questions to obtain tailored insights that will ideally lead you towards something that you can meet or is feasible. Of course, the advice is by no means mandatory or fixed, right? It's an advice, so you can move away. But I think if you're moving away very far, you will probably need to justify this later in your joint clinical assessment. So I think it's good to think wisely upfront. Think about your narrative on how to build robust data. And be explicit about evidence trade-offs, because sometimes there's a lot of thinking why it makes no sense to go or to use real evidence versus another source of evidence. But if you substantiate and put effort in that, you probably be on the same page even before they start answering your questions. During the
And
meeting, yes,
yeah,
add
I
some.
can just mention what you said. It's actually required in the JCA that you justify why you swayed from the recommendations given in the JSC. So that's really underpins what you just said, that you
Yeah.
ask the right questions.
Exactly. And then last is just during the meeting. I think it's a collaboration. That's how I look at it, right? Stay open to adapting your evidence generation plans, things what can be possible within our non-negotiables and our framework. What can we do to move the needle a bit? It's um, this kind of beyond your pivotal study, evidence generation is a building a robust package that can come from different sources, can take different approaches, and it's a journey. And if you start early enough, you probably are best placed. So I think stay open and also I think select your participant thoroughly because the meeting could get technical. Maybe if you, especially if you ask about the about evidence requirements, or maybe it could be very much about what is actually the standard of care. Then maybe you wanna have good presence in terms of clinicians. So think about it. Um,
Okay.
yes, next
Few
slide. I have
minutes
one.
left.
Yes, slide left. So I think um, what if it's not possible? Um, don't panic, that's the message. There's options. There are multitudes of potential advice seeking routes that we had all along. This one actually came on top of that. And they still remain to exist. That's necessary also because you don't know what you can do, your JSC. Um, so think about what kind of formal advice you may want to do instead or in complement. There is, you have a couple of bodies, and I want to make a specific note on the NICE. I mean, we all know the NICE is not part of the European Union. It's not part of the whole EU HTA regulation. However, before Brexit, I would say, I think the NICE and still after the NICE is the body that typically HTA bodies across Europe would look at for their setting their framework, setting their scene. They are technically one of the most advanced and also quite pragmatic in their approach and acceptance of evidence synthesis based on indirect treatment comparisons, etc., real data. If the standard of care is not too different, if you have no reason to believe that the standard of care or the positioning will be different, I think the NICE can still be a very good, for sure, complementary option that will give you great advice also for other countries across Europe. Because the technical people there are really good. And you can connect that also to economic advice, very helpful. And then there are different things to consider, and informal guidance based by payer or HTA body experts can also still be very informative, especially if you have no idea in certain parts of Europe that you feel will become relevant. Anyhow, it's good to have some people from those countries and have their perspectives too, for example.
So shall we go to questions now? Because
Yeah. I
we
think
have
we
this
have a
summary
summary,
slide.
but you will have the slides anyway. So let's
Yeah.
we can
So
even keep this here
yeah,
on.
this is just a summary
So
what we talked about. So do we have questions now that we
yeah, I think we have a few, and I'm
can't
working
see them?
both. And yes, let me pick this one. Competitive disbalance during to unequal JSC access for similar products because of the limited slots. If there is a big demand.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, this is mentioned in the HTA regulation. So they are when they do the prioritization, it says that they should make sure that similar products with a similar situation should be, or the similar scope indications should be treated equally. So at least it's in the regulation that this should be part of the prioritization um, process,
it's
that they
interesting because
should.
it's not a formal criterion, right? And they will look
No,
at this. So but at least
yes,
it's good that it has been
it's already thought
considered.
about in the regulation, and they have to abide by that. But I mean, exactly how it's implemented could be difficult to foresee. If you apply in different time slots, and one time slots have a lot of available time, and then you come with your drug in a time slot where there are much more uh, competition for the request slots, and then yeah, it could be a challenge. I expect for the HTA people to do this prioritization equal, but it's at least thought about in the regulation.
Yeah, that's great. And last, and then we have to close the call. Is that what if you are not able to implement the advice and
Yeah,
do all the requested evidence strategies? I think
that,
it takes
that,
way too long to address this question. However, I think key messages.
but yeah,
I don't think. I
I
think
know. Yeah,
no, but the thing is, this is a very likely scenario, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
very likely that you are not able to address all the requests and that you have to navigate this.
yeah.
And I know what you're going to say, Sigrid. I'm giving you the last word. So what to add from your perspective?
Yeah, and that is what I already actually said, that in the JCA, there is actually a part where you have to justify why you uh, didn't do as recommended. And that's the key word here, justification. You must simply have a good justification why you didn't do what they thought would be the best thing to do. And there are always justifications. So just make sure to put a lot of that is actually what these HTA people, when we talk to them, have said a lot. And it's now also in the guidance that you have to justify why you didn't do different things or why you chose a certain endpoint, for example. So
Yeah, and
justification is key.
exactly. And I think we leave it at that. We
Yeah,
are at the hour. I hope it was
yeah,
informative again and happy to further think with you, support you with any of this. And well, looking forward to the next webinar because we have one more in autumn.
yeah.
Bye bye.
Great. Bye.